At school, English was my worst subject, and I was labelled not creative, and I was told that my writing was terrible. But here's the thing. These days, I run an online writing business. I publish 1,000 words a day online. I got like 26,000 people who follow my writing. And you've been labelled too, haven't you? You've been told you're not smart enough, or you're too emotional, or you're not leader material, or whatever. And the problem with labels is they limit us, don't they? I mean, I found that my labels weren't true, and what happens if yours aren't either? Well, today in this video, I'm going to show you how to spot the labels that are holding you back, and I'm going to give you a really simple, practical exercise that worked for me that you could use to get free too. Welcome to A Little Nudge. My name is Derek, and for the last 3 decades I've been helping people explore faith and relate it to their everyday lives. And in these videos I just give you simple tools, simple techniques that you can use to live a deeper and a more meaningful life. All of us have been given labels by others. And in fact, it's not just others, is it? We give labels to ourselves. We take on our insecurities and our vulnerabilities, and we say all sorts of things to ourselves. You know, you're this and you're that. And the problem with labels is it does 3 damaging things to us. The first thing that it does is it hijacks our choices. And those people that are in the self-development field and are looking at people change their behaviours have discovered that like labels are key to this. And so say you're helping someone who's never done any running really. They've done a bit of walking, but they want to run their first 5K. And you're trying to help them do some running, and you say just run a bit the first day, a bit more the second day, a bit the third day. One of the difficulties there, I mean, we think it's about changing behaviour, but actually what you're doing is you're trying to change the label. And so people can find it difficult because they're telling themselves they're not a runner, and they're maybe trying to run, but sometimes they may give up. They'll feel insecure and imposter, and maybe eventually they will give up because their label is stronger than their behavior. Or imagine you're a parent and you're trying to be a good parent, but you keep losing your temper, or you get angry with your kids, or you got a short fuse, and you tell yourself you're a terrible parent, that you can't control your emotions, that you keep shouting at your kids, that you're not patient. And if you label yourself that, then actually that's going to drive your behavior. And so what a lot of coaches do these days, a lot of life coaches, rather than focus on behavior, they try and change the label first. Once somebody thinks they are a healthy eater, or they are a runner, or they are a good parent, then actually the behavior follows. So that's the first problem of labels. They actually hijacked and direct our choices. The second thing that they do is they dominate our attention. And so they stick to us, particularly negative labels, and they tend to be the loudest voice in the room, even though we might have lots of thoughts and people will say lots of things. I mean, you can try this, you know, if you're married or in your relationship, you know, try it with your spouse, your partner. You know, maybe they come down and they're dressed for a nice night out, and they come down and they've spent hours doing themselves up, and they're saying, how do I look? And you test and you look and you think, oh, your hair's so beautiful, and I love your dress and your makeup and your colour, and you go on and on and on about all their amazing things. And then you say, hang on a second, just turn around a little bit. Oh yeah, your bum looks pretty big in that dress. What's going to happen? Like, you've given 99 compliments, but you give one thing, and actually that's the loudest thing in the room. That thing is going to dominate. They're not going to even remember anything else. And so that's a problem with labels. Not only do they hijack and direct our choices, but they dominate our attention. They're the loudest. I wonder what labels are loudest in your life, you know, maybe from your childhood, or maybe something a parent said, or a boss. I wonder what the things are that you say to yourself. Because the third reason that labels are so damaging is they freeze us in their past. You know, whatever we got labeled has come from the past, and maybe it used to be true, maybe not. Whatever happens, it kind of locks us into that, you know, puts a box around and says that's who you were, that's who you are, that's who you'll ever be. Because researchers have discovered this really interesting thing where we have this, they call it projection bias, which means that we're wired to think that the future is an extension of the present. And so we find it hard to imagine that things are going to be very much different. So in 10 years' time, we think, well, we're maybe changed a little bit, but essentially we're just like an extension of who we are. Whereas when you look like 10 years ago, you might be quite a dramatically different person. You might have different beliefs, different things that you give a time to, different hobbies, different relationships, all sorts of things might be different. But when we look forward, we just imagine that it's kind of an extension of the present. And that's why labels can freeze us in the past, even though we could become a very dramatically different. So because labels hijacked our choices and they dominate our attention and they freeze us in the past, they're very difficult to shake off. And we can have labels that have come from decades in the past that just hang around and we can't shake it off. But here's what I know, that God wants to do something dramatic with those labels. And I know that that's true because of Peter. And Peter was one of Jesus's closest friends, and because of that, we get a lot of stories about Jesus, and Peter's in a lot of them, so we know a lot about his character. And we find out that Peter is very impulsive. So there's this moment where Jesus appears with Moses and Elijah in this like massive dramatic event on the top of this mountain. And Peter sees them and he's like, oh, let's put up some tents for these like ancient wisdom characters and Jesus in this most dramatic mountain experience. And he's just like impulsive. We know that he's very unreliable, that he's the one who denies Jesus. When Jesus needed people to be rock solid about him, Peter's the one who's like, no, I'm not with Jesus. I don't know anything. When Jesus gets arrested, that he can't be relied upon. And we know that he's a loose cannon. When Jesus was getting arrested and Jesus was allowing himself to get took away, it was Peter who gets a sword and he chops off a guard's ear, and then Jesus heals the guy and repairs his ear. And he's just like, he's the sort of team member that would stress me out, Peter. You know what I mean? Impulsive, unreliable, just a loose cannon. What is he doing now? He's just like an absolute nightmare. But here's the thing, when Jesus looks at him, he doesn't label him as the impulsive one or the unreliable one or Mr. Loose Cannon. Jesus gives him a new name. Actually, his name was Simon, but Jesus gives him this new name, which is Peter, and Peter means rock. Rock, like the solid, stable, reliable one. And it's like, that's not his name, Jesus. Like, you're labeling, giving him a new label. It's just not true. And why does God do that? Why does God give Simon Peter a new name that isn't actually true? And it's because of this, like this is so powerful to get our heads around this, that when God sees us, he doesn't see our past, he predicts our future. Like when he looks at Simon, the loose cannon, the unreliable, the impulsive one, he doesn't label him those things because he's not focused on his past. He names him Peter the Rock because he's predicting his future. That even though that isn't true now, it's going to become true. God's going to make it true in his life. And he actually did. Peter became one of the most solid, reliable leaders of the early church. He was just such a key person. He wrote 2 of the letters in the New Testament, 1 Peter, 2 Peter, just a massive source of wisdom and strength. And here's the thing, that people may label our weaknesses, but God wants to name us for our potential and our future. That people might label what we've been, but God wants to name what we're becoming. That like God sees so much more for us, that we may have this like projection bias where we just see the future as a continuation of the present, but God looks at us and says like, I want to give you a new name, I want to give you a new label, that I see stuff for you that you don't actually see for yourself yet. And like I've had personal experience of this. This is like why I'm passionate about it. And there's a really simple practical exercise that I want to give you to do because it made like such a difference for me. And I remember being at this event and they were talking through these I am statements of Jesus. So Jesus has these 7 statements where he uses an image metaphor about his identity and who he is. And he says like, I am the bread of life because he's going to spiritually feed people. Or I am the light of the world because he's going to bring light in their darkness. And he has like 7 of these visual metaphors around his identity. And we were at this event and we were encouraged to think about like, what would our I am statements? Now, if you've kind of got an understanding of the Bible and stuff, you'll know that Jesus was using I am because that was like God's name in the Bible. So Jesus was claiming his like divinity, that he's divine. So we're not kind of really doing anything about that just now, but it is a really powerful exercise. And so once I got over like the uncomfortableness of it, that maybe it was a bit dodgy, but it wasn't really. And I started to think about, like, what are the I am statements for me? And I was going through a very difficult time in my life, and I was feeling very insecure and threatened. I was getting a lot of criticism in my workplace, and so I knew a lot of things that I wasn't good at, that I was lacking, and it shook my confidence. And so I went for this walk, and we were encouraged just to pray and reflect about what our I am statements were. And I was like, I could just think of all the I am not statements, of all my inadequacies and the things that I wasn't good at. And just gradually, God started just dropping images into my mind and stories about my life. And one of them, and I ended up with 3 I am statements that became very significant in my life. And one of them was this. It was, I am a fire starter. I am a fire starter, because I start lots of things and I'm a catalyst for things in the lives of other people. And I could remember, as I was walking and praying, God reminded me of a story of a project that we had very recently, where people had took on responsibility, and by setting a vision of a new project, people had got involved and they started to flourish in their own gifts and abilities and really started to thrive. And God pointed that out and said, look, you start fires for other people. You're a catalyst for what I'm doing in other people's lives. And so I kind of held on to that I'm Firestar. I even bought a picture that went up in my office to remind me actually of my identity in terms of the labels that God wanted to give me. Where like the labels can hold us back in terms of the negative labels we give ourselves or what other people give us, God wants to name us with labels that are about our future, our potential, the things that he sees that he's put in us that he wants to bring out. I remember God called me and told me that he wanted me to like lead a church, to leave my job and work full time leading a church. And we had this back and forth, me and God, for like 12 months. And I was like, I don't want to do that. That's not really right. I don't think you want me to do that. But at the heart of it was the labels that I've been given in the past. And I was saying to God, like, I'm not able to do this. I've not the right personality. I've not got the right skills for what you need here. And God kept telling me he wanted me to do it. So eventually I did do it. And what I found is God could see things in myself that I could never see. And through that process of leading, he brought stuff out of me that I couldn't see. And I believe that he wants to do the same thing in you, that you may have labels that you've given yourself or that other people have given you. But God looks at you and he can see things in you, and he wants to name your potential. He wants to give you new I am statements about who you are and what he wants to bring out. And so that just means you need to cooperate with him in that. You need to like just pray and ask and say, actually, God, what do you see in me? What are the gifts you see in me? What are the kind of new labels that you want to give me? And maybe he wants to heal you through that I am process that I went through. And if you are like really wrestling around your purpose and what the things are that God wants you to do with your life, then I'm going to suggest you watch this video next, because I just talk through 3 questions that you can use to answer what is your life purpose. What is it God wants you to do? And hopefully you find that helpful. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks. Bye-bye.